and friends, thanks for coming. It is important that we organize these events, even if they are relatively small. It is just a few weeks ago that Jersey celebrated its own liberation from occupation. And every time that happens, I always think about Gaza. I always think about Palestine. And I know you shouldn't compare, but I think about the lasting occupation there. For 44 years, some people say. Others say for 63 years since 1948. 63 years of occupation and displacement. If you think about that for a few minutes, then the real gravity and the real despair that people are feeling at the moment seems very real to us as well. And I think sometimes we think there's nothing we can do. And there is not much we can do, but we can show that we hear you, as Natalie said, in these type of events. Displacement is a theme that runs through the conflict. Displacement again and again and again, stretched out over a long period of time. The ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It is being mentioned in today's events. When we look at Jerusalem, we see families, 28 of them, set to be displaced, set to have their homes taken away from them. Some of those families have already been displaced before, in Haifa and in other places that are now in Israel. They have lived displacement, they have internalized displacement, and they are making the stand at the moment where Sheikh Jarrah is a microcosm, not just of place, but also of time. A much broader history of dispossession, displacement, and intimidation. But what stands out as amazing, because I don't just want this to be about despair and sadness and anger. What stands out as amazing is the continued resistance that we are seeing in the face of so enormous odds. Jerusalem at the moment is a symbol for that, for me anyway. Traumatized Palestinians who face everyday tribulations of occupation. That is the first odd that they are facing. The actual reality of their own lives. Checkpoints, access to everyday facilities like hospitals and schools, workplaces. I also want to reference the French fishermen and the discussion that went on here last week or 2 weeks ago about the French cutting off our electricity. Now that is something that happens very regularly for Palestinians in Gaza or in East Jerusalem, cutting off of everyday needs. So the first odd they are facing is the reality of occupation that they have to deal with every day, and they have internalized. The second threat that Palestinians face on an everyday basis are the hostile settlers that we are now seeing protesting, chanting, moving into people's homes, being arrogant about it, not even apologizing any longer. They are backed by great financial interests as well. And I think my friend Ollie is going to talk a little bit more about Jersey's connection to those financial interests. But we all know Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea, who annually gives billions and billions to settler organizations that displace Palestinians on a daily basis. Those hostile settlers are also backed by, of course, the Israeli military, the Israeli state, the fourth military power in the world. So that is the second hurdle they face. Thirdly, the full force of the Israeli state, which goes just beyond just the army and the soldiers patrolling the streets and preventing people from moving freely. The apartheid system is also symbolized by the judicial system, which is now pretending to give any sort of impression of legality to eviction. And we know Israel is an occupying power, even by international law. They have no jurisdiction in East Jerusalem, yet they are trying to give this the legality, or actually the impression of legality. Fourthly, the Palestinians face what I call the narrative, and Natalie has also mentioned this, the media and the language being used surrounding this conflict. We hear about Palestinian militants firing rockets into civilian areas. But militants are people who are resisting what I've just described. And rockets are pieces of metal, scraps, put together to try and have some sort of resistance to occupation and intimidation. Settlements. What is a settlement? A settlement has an innocent connotation, but a settlement is not what we are seeing in Gaza or in the West Bank. We are seeing colonial occupation, encroaching and theft of property and houses. How can you call those settlements? Then the Palestinians also face their own leaders, their own so-called allies, Arab regimes that have long abandoned them. The peace process is only a word. There is no peace process at the moment, but a process of creeping Israeli expansion and ethnic cleansing that is stretched out over time so that we apparently will not notice it. There is no justice, there is no peace. But this time I see a difference to all of the other moments that we have felt the need to come out and protest. I see Palestinians inside Israel protesting against great odds and against great oppression and hostility. That hasn't happened that much before. I see young people in Jerusalem. I see young people in Gaza taking to the streets, a new generation of people resisting oppression. In a way, they are sidelining their own leadership, who have for too long failed to deliver anything tangible. So I would argue this Palestinian resistance is rewriting the Palestinian resistance for the 21st century, and therefore it is important that we are out here, that we say, that we hear them, and that we see them. We are seeing mobilizations across the world, in cities across the world, but everywhere where people have a conscience, and the media are also starting to turn. We are starting to see this new Palestinian narrative emerge. And the arrogance that Israel is displaying at this point in time is not a sign of strength. I'm hoping and I'm praying that this is a sign of weakness, and that the youthful Palestinian protesters that we are seeing on the streets today are rewriting the story and are out there in hope, in despair, but also in hope of accomplishing change. Finally, I want to say something about the comparisons that have been made with South Africa and apartheid. What we hear quite often is that people say there is no one-state solution possible. We need a two-state solution in which Palestinians get their own state. That is not a possibility in Palestine. A two-state solution will be a disaster. It will be something like the South African Bantustans, where the local populations was imprisoned and hermetically sealed out from the outside world. That is what we're seeing in Gaza. And who will bear the brunt of this current round of events again? Is the Israeli military already preparing a ground offensive in Gaza, people who are trapped and who cannot go anywhere. So this is not finished yet. It is important to keep doing this, to keep our voices heard, and to say to the Palestinians that we hear them, that they are not alone, and that we support their attempts at continuing resistance and rewriting the story of the narrative that is now being put before us. Thank you very much.